Okay, good morning. Today's daf is daf kuf bet in Masechet Menachot. We are on the bottom line of kuf aleph amud bet. Let me share my screen and we will get started. Um, Here we go. Okay, so yesterday we are in the middle of an issue, so it's a little bit more complicated than usual. Our beginnings in the opening Mishnah of the 12th parak of Menachot, we learned that a mincha offering that became tamei could be redeemed prior to its placement in a sanctifying vessel. We then saw the following debate. Actually, Shmuel says our Mishnah does say that it's only that the thing that can be redeemed is if the mincha becomes tamei. But you know what? As long as it's before you put it in a sanctifying vessel, it can even be redeemed if it's tahor. So that was Shmuel's view. Rav Kahana says, no, our Mishnah is specific. If it's tamei, it can be redeemed. If it's tahor, it cannot be redeemed. And the Gemara yesterday provided two possible versions of Rav Oshia. Rav Oshia could have said that one that he agreed with Shmuel and one that agreed with Rav Kahana. So, to resolve which of these views is correct, the Gemara provided another statement of Rabbi Oshia. Rabbi Oshia said that according to Rabbi Shimon, the Tana, if one engaged in pigul for a mincha, that mincha will not convey food tuma. Basically, in order to convey convey food tuma, it has to actually be food, and otherwise, it's not capable. If it's unless it's a vessel, the things are not able to convey tuma. So as a result, you needed to either be food or a vessel or, a dead animal or something along those lines. But the bottom line is that you need to have something special that's capable of becoming tamei and then conveying that tuma. And according to Rabbi Shimon, because that pigul mincha was never actually considered food, and we'll talk about why that's the case in a moment, it's not capable of conveying food tuma. And so the Gemara clarified that we must be dealing with a case where the mincha was sanctified while the wheat was standing in the field. Because if the wheat was already wheat and you crushed it in, cut it and you crushed it into flour, well, then that in and of itself would be food, and therefore it would no longer be it would therefore be capable of conveying food tuma. And once there was a moment that it was capable of conveying food tuma, it would always be able to convey food tuma. But with the wheat that was standing in the field, if that was what was sanctified, there was never a moment when the wheat/flour was edible for the owner or permitted to be fed to someone not Jewish. And so as a result, that's why it would not convey food tuma, because it ended up becoming something when it was something that was edible. Theoretically, it was already pigul, and so as a result, you couldn't. It's not treated as food with respect to tuma, according to Rabbi Shimon. And so the Gemara then suggested that this statement was only accurate if Rav Oshia agreed with Rav Kahana, because otherwise the tahor wheat/flour could be redeemed. And Shmuel treats things that, it says should be Rabbi Shimon treats things that could be redeemed as if they were redeemed. Again, that's Rabbi Shimon, as a typo on the screen. Rabbi Shimon treats things that could be redeemed as if they were redeemed. So there effectively was a moment that the wheat flour was edible, because prior to it being brought as and subject to the laws of pigul, before it was brought with the wrong intention that caused it to become pigul, it could have been redeemed if, in fact, we say that tahor minchas can be redeemed, and then it would have a moment of edibleness. And then the pigul mincha should convey food tuma, if in fact you're allowed to redeem tahor sacrifices, and specifically tahor mincha. And so to resolve this, we explained that actually Rabbi Shimon only treated something possible as if it was done if it involved performing a mitzvah. And so that's why we cited a brisa I'm sorry, we cited, I think it was even a Mishnah that in connection with the para aduma that says that if the para aduma can be treated as tahor, even though treated as food is subject to conveying food tuma, even though it's a para aduma that's going to be sanctified and be able to be and be burned completely. But that's because when it comes to a para aduma, there's a specific mitzvah that if you have a nicer para aduma come along, even if you've already slaughtered the first para aduma, you're going to offer a new one. And so as a result, that highlights the fact that we're going to say that if you could redeem something, we treat it as if you did redeem it. And so that's true with respect to redemption, but it's only true when it comes to something that's a mitzvah. But when it comes to this mincha offering, there is no special mitzvah to replace it. And therefore, there's no special mitzvah to redeem something that's tahor. And therefore, even though it is possible to redeem it according to Shmuel, we don't treat it as if it's redeemed according to Rabbi Shimon. And so, as a result, when the Baraisa said that according to Rabbi Shimon, a sacrifice left overnight would not convey tuma if the blood had not been thrown, it meant that there's no opportunity to throw the blood. And so now, as we pick up with the third word on the bottom line of kuf, it should be kuf aleph amabet. Kuf aleph hamabet. Oh my gosh, two typos already. Kuf aleph hamabet. The Gemara, it considers the Bryce's case of pigel for sacrifices, where Rabbi Shimon said that the meat would not convey food tuma. Okay, so let's take a look. But again, third word on the last line, kuf aleph amid bet. V'ha pigel ben b'kodshei kodshim ben b'kodshim kalim. When it comes to pigel, the Baraisa said that Rabbi Shimon said that in those cases it is definitely considered food. The mitzvah lemizrake. Now, when it comes to that, there is a specific mitzvah to throw the blood on the altar, and with the right intent. And so the iboy zorik, and he could have thrown it with the right intent. V'katani de'eno mitame tumas ochlin. And yet, I'm sorry, I think I said that he said that it does convey tumas ochlim. He said that with respect to kodshe kodshim and kodshe kalim, it does not convey tumas ochlim because either the animal was alive or the animal was sanctified, and only when the animal was dead was there a problem. And yet he could have done something about it, because if he had done the right thing, it would have been kosher. And so if we always say that we pretend you did the right thing, if you could have done the right thing, so then these animals, which Rabbi Shimon said do not convey tumas ochlim, they should convey tumas ochlim, as we are now on the top of kuf bet amud aleph. So my lab, the pigel bazrika, don't you have to say, and isn't this talking about a case where the pigel happened when throwing? And so as a result, if he had thrown correctly, it all would have been kosher. And therefore we should treat it as if he threw it correctly, because he could have done so. And so as a result, we should treat it as if the food was kosher, and therefore it should convey food tuma low. The Gemara says, no, that is not the case, as we are near the end of the second line of Kuf Bet Amud Aleph. So the pigel b'shchita, we're talking about where the pigel happened at the time of slaughter. And so there was no moment where one action could have enabled this animal to be kosher for anybody. And so as a result, that's why Rabbi Shimon in the Brisa says that when it comes to kodshim kalim and kodshei kodshim, it's not going to convey food tuma, because there was never a moment when it was food. Aval pigel bezrika mai. All right. So then what would happen if it was pigel during the time of throwing? So that, if you did do the pigel at that moment, meaning again, at the time that you're putting the blood on the altar, you're thinking, I'm going to eat this sacrifice in the wrong time. So, and so that's pigel. So hachinami demetame tumas ochlim. You should say, what's the bottom line? You should say that it would convey food tuma, because at some moment there was an action that could have been taken, and if you had taken that one action, it would now be kosher. And since Rabbi Shimon has the principle that if you could do something, we treat it as if you did do something. We should treat this as if it was good food, even though it's not good food, and therefore it should convey food tuma. Adatani pigo b'mincha mitame tumas ochlen liflog b'dida. Why in the brisa are you specifically distinguishing between pigel of a mincha and pigel of a sacrifice? When it comes to pigel of a sacrifice, Rabbi Shimon says that's never going to convey food tuma, but pigel of a mincha, it can convey food tuma as long as there was a moment when it could have been food, namely prior to your sanctifying it as flour. But you could have said liflog b'dida. You could have made a distinction within the case of sacrifices, of animal sacrifices. And you could have said, Bamedvar Mamurim, when is it that we would say that the sacrifices, the animal sacrifices that are pigel do not convey food tuma? That's the pigel b'shchita. That's when you do the pigel at the moment of shchita, right? The pigel can be done at any of the key moments of a sacrifice. The key question is, the issue is that you're thinking about eating it at the wrong time, and so now it could happen when you're slaughtering, it could happen when you're throwing the blood, it could happen when you're catching the blood or conveying the blood, and so as a result, those are different moments, all of which could result in pigel, and so why not note about pigel bizrika? If you do the pigel at the last of the stages of the sacrifice, mitame tumas ochlan, that would result in food tuma being conveyed. So
but then we learned earlier that for something to be pigel, it has to be done correctly in all of its stages, right?
In all other stages. Obviously, the one stage where it's pigel, it's not done correctly.
It's right in that,
and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the one stage of problematic pigel.
But everything else has to be done correctly. Otherwise,
100%. 100%. Exactly. And that's why when you say that pigel is being done at the moment of throwing, it means that if he had thrown it correctly, it would have been kosher. Because you're exactly right. Every other thing has to be done correctly for it to be pigel. And so given the fact that he could have thrown it correctly, we should treat pigel during the moment of zrika as if it was food, because he could have done it correctly.
But he didn't do it.
Correct. Yes, but the point is that according to Rabbi Shimon, anytime you could have done something, we treat it as if you did do the thing. And so as a result, he could have thrown it correctly, and therefore we treat the food as if you did do it correctly not in terms of being able to eat it, but in terms of being able to convey food tuma. That's the principle. That's exactly what he says with respect to the para aduma. The para aduma, even though it's a para aduma and it's sanctified and you're about to burn it, if in fact it became tameh and it now goes and touches other food, it can convey food tuma. And so as a result, and why is that? It's sanctified. It was never edible. Either it was alive or it was a sanctified animal. Because you could have redeemed it, that's why it's treated as food. Because if you did redeem it, it would now become a nevela and you'd be able to feed it to your dog. And so as a result, that is considered something that is considered food with respect to food tuma. And so same principle here. If it's pigel at the moment of the throwing of the blood, so you could have thrown the blood correctly. So as a result, the animal should be treated as if it is food and therefore able to convey food tuma. And so why are you telling me in this brisa about a pigel mincha? You should be telling me about pigel of an animal sacrifice at the moment of throwing the blood. So pigel of a mincha itzrichalei. No. Rabbi Shimon points out that in fact, Rabbi Shimon needed to teach this law in connection with pigel. Why? Even though pigel is done with an act of kamitza, right? I'm sorry, that the kamitza happened with respect to the mincha offering. The pigel happened with respect to a mincha offering at the moment of kamitza. That's the moment that you're taking the handful. To komet b'mincha kashchita dami. We analogize kamitza to shchita, And so as a result, I might have said that because when it comes to the shechita of an animal, if you do pigel at the moment of shechita, because it's considered as if it never conveys food tuma because it was never had a moment that it could possibly have been a kosher sacrifice. And so, as a result, maybe I would say the same thing with respect to the mincha. Afilu hachi, the Gemara tells us, metame tuma sochlin. Nonetheless, when it comes to a mincha, it does convey food tuma. Why? Not because there was one action that could have made it a kosher sacrifice, but because hoel v'haisa lo shas hakosher mi'ikaro. Because before you sanctified the flour, it was kosher flour and could have been eaten at that point. And so that's why when it comes to a mincha, if you even if the pigel happens at the time of the kamitza, it's still considered food and conveys to food tuma. But if you have an animal where you do shechita and you do pigel at the time of shechita, that never was food, never could have become food, and therefore is not going to convey food tuma. And so we have now answered all the questions according to the first approach of answering the question of how you deal with Rabbi Shimon's ruling regarding a para aduma that notes that you can always redeem it, and the fact that when it comes to something that's consecrated, that we should also similarly treat the possibility of throwing the blood as if you already threw the blood. But now Rav Ashi offers us a different approach.
Where
Again,
is the food in the line of tuma? Is it sheni letuma, a shlishi
it could be a
letuma?
rishon or a sheni latuma, as we will see very shortly.
Because at a
Amar
certain point it's pasul and it doesn't convey tuma.
That's exactly right. We are going to deal with that exact issue in a few minutes. Amar Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi now. So again, above yesterday, we noted that we explained Rabbi Shimon in the Brisa as dealing with a case when there was no time to throw the blood before the animal was left overnight. As otherwise, we would say that blood that could have been thrown is treated as if it was thrown. Now, however, Rav Ashi offers us another potential explanation and says, you know what? There's a difference between redemption and throwing. So Amar Rav Ashi Amrisa Lishmaita Kamei to Rav Nachman. I was telling this to Rav Nachman. Now Tosos points out here that it can't actually be Rav Nachman. It could be Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, or it could be that it was supposed to be Rav Kahana. But in any event, you take a look at the second Tosos on Kuf Bet Amud Aleph for more details on that. Afilu Temulan Mamish. Even if you tell me that in fact it really did stay overnight, meaning that you had a moment that you could have thrown the blood. It's not as if you shechted the animal right before nightfall, and so there was never a chance that you could throw the blood, which was how we explained the brisa earlier. But really, afilu tema de pigos bezrika. And you know what? You could even say that he intended, when we just talked about pigel and throw, and the pigel thought as opposed to the lan thought, and leaving overnight thought that pigel, when it comes to throwing, it could be even throwing the blood, not just shchita, right? We ended up interpreting the brisa as referring to only when you are doing shchita. But you know what? Rav Ashi says it could even be during pigel. De'i by parik amar, because if he wished, when it comes to redemption, when it comes to the parika, when it comes to the separating it and redeeming it, that is something that he could have done. He could just do. But iba havazarik lo amrinan. We don't. We do say that you do that when it comes to redemption. That since he could have done it, we consider it as if he did do it. But when it comes to throwing, we don't say it. So, Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. I'm going to show you in a different context that, in fact, we do say when you could have thrown it, we treat it as if you did. Klal Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua gives a general rule. Kol shahaisa la shas heter la kohanim. Anything that had a moment of permissibility to the kohanim, ein mo'alin ba. It's no longer considered God's in connection with me'ila, right? If you have a sacrifice and now you've dedicated the sacrifice and you haven't yet brought it, and now you use the animal, somebody else uses the animal accidentally, that is the act of me'ila, and they have to pay back and offer a sacrifice and address it. However, when I've sacrificed my animal and the blood has been put on the altar, and so now it is edible for the Kohanim, so now the meat that is associated with that sacrifice no longer has the sub is no longer subject to meila, even if somebody else comes and takes it. Even though it's supposed to go to the Kohanim, but if somebody else comes and takes it, they've done something wrong. They've eaten kudshim that they're not supposed to, but at least they haven't committed meila. V'kol shelo haisala shas hater lekohanim, and anything that doesn't have a moment of permission, so molin ba. So then there is meila. Give me an example of something that had a moment of being permitted for Kohanim. Shalana, imagine a sacrifice that remained overnight. Because you could have eaten it when it was during the day, but then it was left overnight. Vishanitmes, or it became tameh. Oshiyatza, or it went out of vishayatza, or it went out of the area that it's supposed to be eaten in. Ve'ezahu shalo haisa lo shas heter kolakonim. And what is an example of doesn't that never had a time that it was permitted? Shenishchata chutz lizmana o chutz limkoma. You either slaughtered it with the intention to eat it at the wrong time, or you slaughtered it with the intention to eat it in the wrong place. The first being pigel, the second being also prohibited. Shekiblu psulin.
Explain the first section where you mentioned leave it overnight. Isn't that notar? You're not allowed to eat it, right?
You're not allowed to eat it. The question is but there was a moment when it was kosher to the Kohanim, and therefore there's no meila. That's what the question that we're dealing with now. Not whether it's permitted to eat. We all agree it's not permitted to eat in these cases, but is it meila if somebody uses it?
But when was it permitted to the Kohen?
Before it was left overnight.
Oh, so in that at
in
10
that
o'clock
window.
tonight. 10 o'clock tonight, let's say.
Exactly. Mishakiblu mipsulin v'zarku estama. And another case would be where it would never have been permitted is if somebody who is not a Kohen or not kosher to receive the blood received the blood or threw the blood. So Katani Mia Resha, Shalana Vishanit Mes Vishayatsa. All right, so in the first of the cases where there was a moment of permittedness, we talked about lana. It was left overnight. Now, my lav lana mamish, what kind of lana are we talking about here? Maybe we're talking about where the whole sacrifice was left overnight. And Rashi tells us that we're talking about even the blood. So there was never a true moment of kashrus. And the reason that we're treating this as if it was edible is because if he did throw the blood, he could have thrown the blood and it would have been kosher. The katani de ein molin, and yet we treat meila in this case as a case of a situation where there's no meila because there was a moment where it was permitted for kohanim, even though in point of fact it was never permitted for the kohanim because it was lan, both the blood and the meat were left overnight. So no, you don't have to say that. Ru'uya letzeis, u'ru'uya letame. We're dealing with a situation where it was fit enough that if it went out of the Beis Hamikdash, it would be invalidated. Or it was fit enough where if it became tameh, it would be invalidated. Meaning that you did throw the blood correctly. So avalina mamish mai. All right, so fine. You want to interpret this brisa as talking about where you did throw the blood and it's just the meat that is being left over. But what about that case of where the blood and the where both the blood and the sacrifice and the edible part of the sacrifice were left overnight? What would the halacha be? Hachanami de mo'olin. We would say that you could do meila. So hi kolsha haisa la shas heter lekohanim v'kolsha lo haisa lo shas heter lekohanim. Why, if that's true that you would have meila, why are you focusing on whether or not the kohanim have the ability to eat it? Kol sheyeshla shas heter lekohanim. I'm sorry. Why are you focusing on whether it was possible to have a moment of permissibility? Kol sheyeshla shas heter lakohanim ein mo'alin ba. It's as long as it does have a moment of possibility. Because she'ein shas heter lakohanim mo'alin ba mibayle. The Gemara, the Brisa should not have mentioned the theoretical possibility. It should have mentioned the actual, what actual was happening. And since it mentioned the theoretical possibility, so therefore it seems like it is saying that that in the case of lan, where both the blood and the animal were not able to were not offered. Both the blood and the animal were not handled in time, and they were both left overnight. So then we're still going to treat that as if as if it no longer conveys me'ila. So that shows that in fact, when it comes to me'ila, we will treat the possibility of throwing the blood as if you did throw the blood.
But he never
So
did, right? During the
you
whole
never
night.
did. You never did. So Ella
He
Amar
didn't
Rav Ashi.
complete the whole. He didn't complete the whole process of the shechita of the korban, right? He didn't complete the whole thing. The four steps. The blood is still
Correct,
there
correct,
in the
correct. He did
bucket.
not. But there was only one step left, and according to Rabbi Shimon, and the entire Gemara is according to Rabbi Shimon. According to Rabbi Shimon, if you have one step left and you could have done the one step, we treat it as if you did with respect to Tuma. And so Ella Amar Rav Ashi Me'ila Atuma Karamis. 1 second.
Is
The
that
so
onus or Pashia? He's deliberately not doing it, or he just couldn't get to it. It was a
no, she,
storm.
it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference.
Well, if there was a hurricane or if a
No, it
storm,
doesn't make a difference. It's still lawn. It would still need to be burned, and the question of whether or not it's food would still have the same answer. So the Rav Ashi now. So again, the question that was 1 second. You Rav Ashi wanted to say that when it came to throwing blood, we don't treat the could have as if you did it. But 1 second, when it comes to Me'ila, we do treat the could have as if you should have, as if you did. So that's the question. So Rav Ashi says now gives a different answer. So Rav Ashi's first answer is that, oh, that wasn't talking about a case where you could have. It's talking about where you did. And then we said, no, but if the language of the Brisa suggests that even if you could have, we would treat it as Me'ila. And so as a result, so Me'ila Atuma Karamis, 1 second, you're trying to so Rav Ashi now says you're trying to use Me'ila to contradict my explanation with respect to Tuma. Me'ila mishum kedusha v'lav kedusha he. Well, when it comes to Me'ila, the question is the item holy or not? And look, when it comes to holiness, lebasar depaka la kedusha say. Once the kedusha leaves, it's gone forever, and we treat it as if it's never coming back. But my hadra rachvalei, how can it possibly come back? As Rashi puts it, mi'ila mishum kedusha. Second of the medium wide lines in Rashi near the bottom of Kuf Bet Amud Aleph. Mo'alin ba umishum lav kedusha paka me'ila. So first of all, if it's kedusha, then you have me'ila, and once you have that, it's not kadosh any longer. So then me'ila goes away. Ulabasar de paka, and once that the me'ila possibility has gone away, kedusha san shenira lizrak. The liyos muteris lakohanim. It depaka kedusha san. Once the kedusha left, because it was possible to throw the blood and become permitted for Kohanim. So that alone, just the possibility, works with respect to Me'ila. But as we continue back into the Gemara,
kedusha left? What caused the kedusha to
the
disappear?
possibility of throwing the blood correctly. The possibility of throwing the blood correctly causes the kedusha to leave, and so as a result, that's what's going to enable us to, and so it will not come back. But
Even though the blood is still there and it wasn't thrown?
even though blood was still there and not thrown, that's what we're learning from the Brisa in with respect to Me'ila. But now 9 lines up, last word on the line, Tuma Mishum Uchla. But when it comes to food and the tuma that's going to be created as a result of food, v'lav uchlahi, and now it's not, it depends on whether it's food or not its theoretical possibility of being food. And so as a result, hecha de'i zarik mishve le uchla umatami tumas oklin. When he actually throws the blood, then it becomes food and actually can convey food tuma. But hecha dei lo zarik. Lo mashave le uchla ve'enu matame tumas oklin. But if he doesn't, so then it's not. So as a result, that's the bottom line, is that when it comes to the food tuma situation, you actually have to throw the blood. And so therefore Rav Ashi is able to keep his answer. And again, he's saying that bottom line is when it comes to redemption, that we treat the redemption as if it happened. But when it comes to throwing blood, we don't treat it. When it comes to tuma, even though when it comes to meila, we'll treat blood as possibly being thrown. That if it's possible to throw the blood, we'll treat it as if it was thrown. So we've essentially created three distinctions. We've got one category where even in connection with tuma, if it's possible, we treat it as if it happened. Namely, that's redemption. And then when it comes to throwing, if it's for Me'ila, we'll treat something that could have been thrown as if it's thrown. But when it comes to Tuma, we won't. Okay, so now we're going to ask a question. Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. What about the following Mishnah in Kritot, Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Bet?
There's no difference between redemption and Me'ila, really. They're the same thing. If it's as if, right? For Me'ila and redemption.
No, Me'ila is the Isser. Redemption is what you're doing in order to avoid the issue. So I'm not sure I understand your distinction, but we have to make progress. So Meisvei, I'm going to ask you questions from this Mishnah in Kritot, Hamevi Asham Taloi. If you bring in Asham Taloi, again, that's a sacrifice that you bring if you sinned accidentally, if you don't know whether you sinned. Rashi explains that if you have two pieces of meat, one is kosher, one is not. You ate one of them. You're not sure which one it was. So you set aside that animal, v'noda shalochata, and now you're told, you know what? That the piece of meat that you ate, that was the kosher piece. You didn't sin. Im ad shelo nishchat nodalo. If before you slaughtered the animal, you were informed. Yetze v'yira be'eder. Divrei Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Meir says, you know what? It goes out and is considered non-holy. You don't even have to wait for it to get a mum. Rashi explains. But the Chachamim say, as we turn to Kufbet, I'm going to bet, you're at ad sheyista'ev. You have to let it graze until it gets a blemish. V'yimacher v'yiplu damav l'nedava, and you have to then sell it, and the money goes to donated offerings, to basically offerings when the altar is not busy. We bring the special donated offerings, and it goes as an ola on the sacrifice. And the Gemara increases. Take a look at the top. Rashi explains the Gemara Mefarish Taima Dirabanan. What is the reasoning of the rabbis? Mitoch shelibo nokfo. Because his heart is struggling with the fact that he possibly sinned, Gomer umaktishla, he's not going to have a conditional sanctification. He's going to do a definitive sanctification. And therefore, even if he gets told that he in fact did not sin, the animal still maintains a level of kedusha, and therefore it needs to graze until it develops a mum, and the money then gets used for an ola sacrifice. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yakrib. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, just bring it. Who cares that we now know that you didn't sin in this case? Because Shim Eno Baal Chet Zeh, Harehu Baal Chet Acher. Everybody has something that they don't know that they sinned about, so let it come for a different sin that the person isn't sure whether or not he sinned about. So, Mishnah Nishka. Now the Mishnah continues. If you already slaughtered the animal, no delo, and now he becomes knowledgeable of the fact that he didn't sin, Hadam Yishafek v'Abasar Yisarev. Look, it's according to the Tanakama opinion, the blood gets spilled out. You do not put it on the altar, and the meat gets burned. Burned meaning outside the Beis Hamikdash. It doesn't get burned on the altar. Nizra kadam. If the blood had been thrown already, well then habasar yechel. Well, now the meat can be eaten because essentially you finished offering the sacrifice. And so as a result, you finished offering all of the key elements of the sacrifice. Now you found out that it's that you didn't sin, but the sacrifice is done already. That's a kosher sacrifice. But Rabbi Yossi says, you know what? Afilu hadam bekos. Even if the blood is still in the cup, yizarek v'habasar yechel. You should throw that blood, and the meat can be eaten. Why? Presumably, Amar Rava, and Rava explained, why does Rabbi Yossi take this position? Rabbi Yossi b'shitas Rabbi Shimon Amar. He's holding like Rabbi Shimon. De Amar kol ha'omed lizrok kazaruk dami. That at any time that you have blood that's able to be thrown, it's as if it was thrown. And so as a result, this shows, right, that we have a more broad principle of throwing blood. Even that if you have something that could have been thrown, we treat it as if it was thrown. So again, Rav Ashi's view has been challenged because Rav Ashi wanted to say that when it comes to throwing blood, we don't say that if you could have thrown it, we treat it as if you did throw it. So midi who Taima, 1 second, you're telling me that that's Rabbi Yossi's reason, that Rava is correct? I'll give you another reason. Amri b'mar Rava. They said in Israel, Mishmei de Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, in the name of Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Hainu time de Rabbi Yossi. Here's the Rabbi Yossi's reasoning. De kasaver klei sharis mekadshin es hapsulin lichatchila likare. That a holy vessel has the ability to make something that is invalid, that probably should not be thrown, make it so that you can throw it even lechatchila. That is Rabbi Yossi's position. And so as a result, if you have something that's totally puzzle, of course you can't. But this sacrifice, it's not totally puzzle. It's just not needed any longer because the guy didn't do a sin. So in that situation where it's not totally invalid, it's invalid because you don't need it, but it's not totally invalid, will allow the kos, the kli sharet that is holding the blood to sanctify it sufficiently so that you can throw the blood. And so that's the explanation. Okay, so with that, we have now answered all of the questions according to Rav Ashi, and so we effectively have two approaches. We have one approach that says that if even when it comes to throwing blood, if you have a moment where you could have done it, we treat it as if you did do it. And then we have Rav Ashi's approach that says that's true with respect to redemption, but it's not true with respect to throwing. And now, as explained by Rashi, we're going to go back and we're going to, although the Gemara has just on some level rejected Rava's explanation, at least according to Rav Ashi, the Gemara now challenges Rava's explanation. And so effectively, Rav Ashi goes on the offensive and says, Rava, I'm going to challenge your explanation and say, which is based on Rabbi Shimon saying that whatever could be thrown is treated as if it has been thrown. So Rav Ashi says the following, Amar le Rav Ashi the Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana is asked, Mida Amar Rabbi Shimon kol ha'omed lizrok kazarok dami. If you're going to say that when it comes to Rabbi Shimon, he says that anything that could be thrown, it's as if it was thrown. Kol ha'omed. Well, then maybe we should even say the following: Kol ha'omed lisrof nami kasarov dami. Anything that could have been burned is as if it was burned. Meaning, if you have a mitzvah to burn it, we treat it as if you did burn it. So nosar ufara. When it comes to the nosar, when you have a korban that's been left overnight, or a para, when you have a para aduma. Amai mitamim tumas ochlin. Why should they ever convey food tuma? Afra ba'alma ninhu. They're supposed to be burned, and so as a result, we should treat it as if they were burned. And if all you have left is ashes, ashes is definitely not food, and it becomes out of the category of food because it's no longer the same thing any longer. And so as a result, nobody should treat it as if it is conveying food tuma, even though you haven't yet burned it yet, because based on that same principle that Rabbi Shimon says that anything is capable of doing X, we treat it as if X happened. If it's a mitzvah to do X, well, then we have a mitzvah to burn, nosar and the paraduma. So Amar Le Rav Kahana answers, Chibas HaKodesh Machshartan. No, what's special about Nosar and Tuma is that we are going to say that we treat them as conveying food Tuma. Yes, theoretically, because you could burn it, we treat it as if it was burned. But there's something special about these holy items. And because of our love and affection for these holy items and our respect that we want to show to them, we are going to treat them as tameh. So Amarle Ravina Ravashi, Ravina says to Ravashi, Nehida mehenya lehu chibas hakodesh leipsule de. Okay, now we get to the issue that Ken mentioned, that he talked about, well, there's a difference between a psul and tameh. I can understand if you're going to tell me that when it comes to the para aduma and the nosar, that they are going to be code that they are going to be effectively invalidated because of our chibas hakodesh, because of our the respect that we want to show to things that are holy. But lekurui tame nami, are you going to call it tame also? Meaning enabling it to make other things tame? Lemimne be rishon usheni, in order to have it cause either a secondary, a primary or secondary tuma. Mima hanyale, is that what we're going to do? Because if you're going to do that, Tivshir Debai Reish Lakish, then you'll be able to answer an unanswered question of Reish Lakish. Because what did Reish Lakish ask? Reish Lakish asked the following question: Tsarid shel menachos. If you have a dry piece of a mincha offering, meaning that it never touched the liquid in the oil in the mincha, and so as a result, now we're not in Rabbi Shimon any longer. We're in the basic idea of whether or not, and so in order for food to be capable of becoming tameh, it needs to have touched some liquid. And so, and this food and this mincha never touched the liquid. Now it's part of a larger group that touched the liquid, that touched the oil. And so the question is, monin bo rishon osheni? Oh, ain monin bo rishon osheni. Do we say treat that dry spot as if it was tame, and therefore it can cause tuma for other things? Or do we say, no, it's not considered tame? And we didn't answer it. This question of Reish Lakish was never answered. And now you're suggesting that we should be able to answer it, because we're saying that, according to Rav Kahana's answer, it's going to because of Chibas HaKodesh, we're going to cause it to be treated as if it's actually tameh. So no, kimi boy leila reish lakish del raisa ki kamrinan de rabbanan. No, yeah, you have to distinguish. When Reish Lakish asked his question, he was asking it biblically, and we never answer that question biblically. But what we have done, and what Rav Kahana is doing, and what these baraisas are doing, based on this distinction, is answering that question rabbinically. And the answer to the question is that rabbinically, we will treat it as food tameh, meaning that it can convey tuma just like food. So it is potentially a rishon or sheni, depending on how it became tameh. It could be either a rishon or a sheni. And so as a result, that's the situation, and that's our explanation. And so in the end, we've effectively defended for Rava's potential answer. And as a result, we have a number of different approaches, and the Gemara sort of leaves us on this hanging as to exactly how we end up paskening with respect to kol ha'omed le X X dummy. That whether when we say that you had the possibility of doing X, do we treat it as if you did X? And is that a broad statement that applies in all cases? Certainly seems like it at the very end. Or do we say, no, it depends on the situation? And is it a physical thing, or is it just a mental thing? And if it's just, according to Rav Ashi's explanation, if it's just mental, then we'll say it. But if it's more than that, maybe we won't. Okay. All right. So now we come to the next Mishnah. And so the next Mishnah addresses whether bringing a different type of mincha from the type 1 vows fulfills the vow. That's the question. If I say I'm going to do X and I do Y, they're both minchas. Do I fulfill my vow or not? The simple answer is no. Ha'omer harei alai b'machavat. If one says that they're going to bring a griddle-based mincha offering, vehevi b'marcheshes, and you end up bringing a pan-based mincha offering, b'marcheshes, or you say that you're going to bring a pan-based mincha offering, vehevi b'machavas, and you bring a griddle one, masha hevi hevi. Whatever you brought, you brought. Videcho vaso lo yatsa. meaning that what you brought is going to be a valid sacrifice, but you have not fulfilled your vow. You need to bring another one. Rashi helps us out. Take a look at the Rashi. First Rashi on the Mishnah. Masha Hevi. De Imar lo l'shem nidro. We will say that this is not for his neder hevia. He brought it. And Ellen and Dabach, it's just another commitment that he wanted to bring. He said he was going to bring it. And so as a result, we'll just assume that it was another commitment. And so the bottom line is that's fine. Now, the key language here in this Rashi is that we assume it was another commitment. We're going to get to a case where we can no longer make that assumption, and then we'll say that it is invalid. But let's take a look at the next case. Zola havi machmas. Now, instead of saying that he's going to bring a griddle-based mincha offering generally, he says that this flour is going to be brought as a griddle-based mincha offering. Vehevi b'marcheshes, and now he brings it in a pan. B'marcheshes vehevi b'marcheshes, or vice versa. Harezo psula. It is puzzle. It's invalid because we can't make any excuses any longer. He said that this flour that's in his that he's right in front of him, he was going to bring in one manner, and he didn't bring it in that manner, and so as a result, he's violated his oath. He hasn't fulfilled his oath, and in fact, he's committed to bringing it in a certain way, and he's brought it in a different way. It's not a kosher sacrifice. And so uh, um, uh, and the point is that as Rashi tells us, Zola hevi b'machabat shahaya isaron solos munach lefanav. He had an isaron of flour sitting in front of him. V'amar zula hevi b'machmas, and he said he's going to bring it in the griddle. Harezu psulan dekaval kli shehizkirba. And it's going to be puzzled because he set aside a particular kind of vessel. Ve'ein yachol l'shnosa l'kli acher. He doesn't have the right to change the nature of the vessel. Haomer harei alai shnei isroneos lahavi b'chli echad. Now back in the Mishnah, and if he says, I'm going to bring two isaron, and I'm going to bring it all in one vessel, behevi b'shnei kelim, but in the end he brings it in two separate vessels, b'shnei kelim behevi b'chli echad, or he says he's going to bring it in two vessels and he brings it in one vessel, masha hevi v'dei chabaso lo yatsa. If what he brought, it's going to be kosher because he didn't focus on. He just committed himself to bringing something. He did not say that this flour was going to be it, and so as a result, his offering is valid, except that he still needs to fulfill his oath. Elu b'kli echad. If, however, he says that this flour is going to be, these two isaron are going to be brought in one vessel. Vehevi b'shnei kelim, vehevi b'kli echad, harei elu psulin. Well, then, if he says that this is going to be brought in one vessel, or this is going to be brought in two vessels, and he does the opposite, well, then it's going to be invalid. And Rashi explains, because either you have taken too many kamitzas, or you don't have enough flour in it, and so as a result, you're not burning enough flour, or you're burning too much flour. Bottom line is, you end up in a situation where you have too much or too little, and so as a result, that's going to be a problem. Next case, harei alai shnei isronos lahevi b'kli echad. If I commit that I'm going to bring, again, now I'm not committing this flour, but I say generally, I'm going to bring two isaron in one vessel, and behevi b'shnei kelim, and now I bring it in two vessels. Amrulo, and they say to the guy who's doing it, b'kli echad nadarta, you swore that you were going to bring it in one vessel. So how are you doing it in two vessels? And yet, hikrivan b'shnei kelim, if he continues and he ignores them and doesn't say anything back to them, psulin, it's puzzle. Why is it puzzle? Top line in the Y lines of Rashi. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. 1, 2, not the top line in the wide lines of Rashi, but 5 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi. Amrulo b'kli echad nadarta. V'lo chashlo divreihem, and he doesn't worry about he doesn't respond to them or address their words. V'hikrivan b'shnei kelim, and he goes ahead and he brings it in two different vessels. Psulin, it is now invalid. Afagavdalo amar elu, even though he never focused on this, pointing to the flour, saying that this flour was going to be brought in one vessel or in two vessels. Lehevi b'kli. He never said that this flour is going to be brought in one vessel. Dahashta leika lamemer l'shem nedava acheres, because now we can no longer say that he had another oath that he was thinking of. Ma'isi law. And that was why he was bringing it. Dekaven de amrule b'kli echa nadarta, because everybody was saying around him, hey, you swore to do it in one vessel. Havale lamemer. He should have said, now that he's doing it in two vessels, he should have said to them, Ana l'shem neder achwina ma'isina no. I'm bringing it for another neder. So as a result, we no longer have that possibility to offer that explanation. And because we can't give that explanation anymore, it's not going to be a valid sacrifice. And so as a result, that's why that's not going to be a sacrifice. But if he changes, if he switches it back to one vessel and fulfills his oath, everything's fine. On the other hand, if in fact he commits to bring two isaron, separate isaronim into two separate vessels and essentially offer two mincha offerings, and he ends up bringing it in one vessel. Amrulo b'shnei kelim nedarta. Again, similar to the previous case, and the people who were watching say, "Hey, you said you were going to bring it in two vessels." Hekrivan b'shnei kelim. If he switches it to two vessels, chayrim, then it's certainly good. Nisano l'chli echad. However, if he keeps it in one vessel, kishtei menachos shenis arbo, it is not as if he brought one mincha, but it's as if two menachot were combined in a single vessel. And we've seen, now we'll take a look at the Rashi top line of the Y lines, as we saw earlier in this Masechet, Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, im yachol l'kmotz mizo b'fnei atzmo umizo b'fnei atzmo kshero. If in fact the two isaron are sufficiently separate in the vessel such that one can take a kamitza from each one and not have it contaminated by the other isaron, well, then you're going to be okay. The imlav psulot, but if not, then you're going to have a problem and it's going to be puzzle. So as a result, there's essentially some leniency that we can give in this case because we can still treat the two menachot that are in one vessel as separately two menachot. And in the case where we said this flour, lehevi b'shnei kelim, that we're going to bring it in two vessels, vehevi b'kli echad, and we bring it in one vessel, pasul, and we said earlier in this Mishnah that it is invalid. That's talking about kagon she'ein yachol likmotz mikol echad b'fnei atzma. That's talking about a situation where you couldn't do the kamitza from each of the isaron individually, and so as a result, that's why that case is going to be pasul. Okay, utsricha, why do you need to tell me both about the griddle pan and the one case involving one or two isaron? Tricha, we need to teach both of them. If I only told you about not being allowed to switch between a machvas and a marcheshes, mishum da'amar b'machvas v'kamaiti b'marcheshes, it's because you didn't do what you said. But aval hacha de'idi v'idi b'machvas, where everything is in the right container, v'idi v'idi b'marcheshes, or they're both in the right, they're either in the machvad or they're in the marcheshes. Ema yedei nidro nami yotza. Maybe you could say that yes, he brought one instead of two or two instead of one, but maybe what's really important is the vessel that you chose and not the number. And so as a result, we need to be told that, you know what, the number is important. And if we only had the number case, it's because you tried to divide it. Aval hasam, the low polybe, you didn't do any division, you just switched the container. Amalo, maybe that wouldn't cause it to be not good for your vow. So tzricha, therefore, we need to teach both cases, that in both cases, whether you switch the number or the vessel, you're not going to have fulfilled your vow. Tanurabanan, Masha Hevi. With respect to this, the Tanakama says that we're going to now bring a different opinion. We say that what you brought, you brought. That's what it says in our Mishnah. V'dei nidro lo yatsa. You didn't fulfill your vow. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon says, Af yedei nidro nami yatsa. You even fulfilled your vow. And so as a result, we have a new opinion that isn't in our Mishnah that actually suggests that maybe it's because you could have done it. And so once you could have done it, we treat it as if you did do it. So that is where we're today. Now the Gemara next turns to the cases involving this flour. But for that discussion, please stay tuned to tomorrow's daf. Wishing you a wonderful day.